Hey guys, how you doing today? I thought I would do a review of the first episode of AHSOKA. I wasn't originally going to do that because I was going to wait to watch both episodes as it is a 2-episode premiere. But I thought, what the heck? I've just watched this thing. I like to give episodes their own individual review, so we're going to do that probably pretty briefly. I have to say, to start off, if there's noise in the background, I apologize because the groundskeepers are outside and I can't really do anything about that. But let's hope it stays relatively quiet in here while I'm doing the review. I am thankful for the groundskeepers, though. Anyway, AHSOKA, Episode 1. What did I think? Well, it was largely a mixed bag. Now, I have to talk about, just for a second, my knowledge of the property before I get into this, because it's going to be relevant. Basically, if it's live action in Star Wars, I've seen it. I've seen everything, movies, TV shows, everything they've released that's been live action, I've seen. As far as Rebels and Bad Batch and Clone Wars, I've seen a little bit of Clone Wars, the first season. I didn't see Rebels. I didn't see Bad Batch. So I don't really know any of that stuff. I played the Clone Wars game when it was out on Nintendo Wii. And that's basically my knowledge of AHSOKA, just from what I've seen of that stuff, which is very, very little. And I know that that's frustrating for some people because you might think, how can I review the series fairly if I haven't seen the things which would inform me about who these people are? Well, that's fair, but I'm not really drawn to animation, and I think that means that, if anything, I review the series by itself as a more individual thing, and I think I do that a little bit more fairly because that means they can't rely on member berries. They can't rely on setting off those nostalgia bells in my head. I'm going to have to watch it as its own thing. So, with that being said, what did I think of it? As I said, it's a mixed bag, and there's positive and negative. So, in the beginning of this, I was super stoked because I hadn't watched any of the trailers. I tried to avoid doing that. So, I saw the text crawl in the beginning, which is kind of a fusion between what they did before with the mainline movies and also some of the spin-offs and stuff. Kind of a mixture of what they've done before, and I thought, okay, that's cool, red text crawling up from the bottom. And the music stuck out to me too, because I'm like, hey, I like this music. It sounds really cool. That's a high point in the series, by the way. I'll get to that more later. But then you have the shot of the ship, which is straight on at first, and then the camera kind of tilts back, and that's cool. So I'm watching this, I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool. And then the people in the show start talking, and that's where things start to be a problem for me. Because one of the things that I'm very passionate about with presentation in Star Wars is that I think the people in the universe should talk as naturally as possible. This is a big problem. Excuse me. This is a big problem that the prequels had, in my opinion. Because if you watch the original Star Wars movies, 4, 5, 6, those characters talk very naturally. And this came out in the 70s. So that was further removed from people today. But yet those people in the 70s talk more like people do today than a lot of the other properties that have come out since then. Because if you listen to Luke, I was going down to Tosche Station to pick up some power converters, and you got Han, who's going to fly it, kid? And even Obi-Wan Kenobi, who had more of a wise sage way of speaking. He had a very natural speaking pattern for someone who was older. I think that's one of the things people get wrong about Obi-Wan's speaking pattern. He doesn't speak in that sort of way that people are talking in this Ahsoka series, where it's like they're not allowed to have contractions in their speech, do not, cannot, have not, it's, I do not know. Obi-Wan's kind of like, I don't know, Luke, I think you should do this, he's more of a natural way. So I think the reason why that's so important is because it establishes that people in this universe are like people in our universe. The only thing that's different is basically everything else, the circumstances, the technology, but people are still people. That's what kind of gets you on board with this, because if people in the first 3 Star Wars films had talked really weird and not natural, then it would have made this seem way, way, way more alien than it actually is. You got, kids with their speeders in that series, in those 3 films, and it's like hot rod culture for us in the United States. So, or really anywhere in the world, really, because Star Wars is popular everywhere. So right off the bat in Ahsoka, you kind of get this problem with the the speech being very kind of wooden. And then, I hate to say this, and this is nothing against the actors, I always have to give that caveat, but the acting in this is just not very good. And that's a shame. That's something which has largely taken me out of it. Because as I was watching this beginning part, I was like, okay, maybe this beginning part just has some people who are mainly extras and they don't serve a gigantic role in the series. Maybe that's why the acting isn't really up to par. And then, of course, you've got the two false Jedi coming in, and they pull out the blade, and you realize, well, I don't know if they're actually called this, but I was like, oh, it's the Sith. And then you start with the lightsaber battles, and it's very actiony. I'm like, okay, this is going to be awesome, right? I thought, all right, maybe that was just, they're pulling this off really well. Maybe that thing in the beginning was just kind of a fluke. Maybe it's going to be fine. And then the main characters start talking, and boy, does this episode get slow, and the dialogue does not help the enjoyment of it, I think. It's just really strange. I don't know why they would have started it off making you think it was going to be one thing. Maybe they're saying this is going to happen later in the series or something. But it's just to start with that much momentum and then to immediately halt it and to have this sort of very wooden dialogue style was really strange. And I will say, I think Ahsoka's good, which is, pretty good because she's the main character, right? I think Ahsoka's line delivery is done very well. She has a more natural way of speaking, and I kind of like that. She doesn't have this sort of very grandiose, wise sage way of speaking when she says things, but I think it makes her more relatable. Hers is the exception to this thing about the acting not being great. And I have to say something about the scene with her and the robots, too, because I thought that was pretty phenomenal. The fact that she cut underneath the robots to get them to fall down into the earth as an advantage, that's just really smart. That's smart fighting. I like when people in series and movies do things which give them an advantage, which is not purely based on strength, where you have to basically suspend your disbelief to the max that this person can take those people out. Droids don't think the same way that humans do, so of course she could go through and do it, and she's a Twi'lek, but anyway. So that part was great, and then we go down and, in that part where she was down underneath the ground, like I said, it kind of made a screeching halt right there, and it was strange to see that after that. And then, you've got Ahsoka running up and grabbing the ship, and I thought that was pretty cool. And then, of course, you got David Tennant, who is the droid there, and I'm always going to be on board with David Tennant, right? He's pretty good in the series. But there's a couple of things that I'm having a problem with here, too. One thing is characters do things that make no sense to me. The fact that Ahsoka allowed her former Padawan to steal that digital map when she said it stays here and she knows that she wants to take it. The fact that she didn't just keep it on her person or keep it with her while she was analyzing it, that really bothers me. Because then it's like we're diving into a side plot to do something that could have been avoided, which I find one of the most frustrating things when watching a show. When something happens that's bad, basically for no reason, and then it didn't have to. And it's pretty bland in the middle, I think. But toward the end, we start to get a little bit more action. And it's not just action that I like. I want to make that clear. I really liked Andor, and Andor didn't have a ton of action in it. It was mostly dialogue and things that were happening that were not purely action-based. But the reason why the action is important here is because I just don't think this cast is carrying these scenes in a way that works in a Star Wars show without the action. You need a very specific kind of story for that to happen. And the bad part is I think this script, this whole thing with these parties going around and her escaping from the temple, and you got this kind of dark order chasing her down, and you got her friends that are helping her, not just her friends, but basically people in the military command, right? I think that plot could work well if the direction was a little bit better. And whenever you have a lot of people in a show who aren't acting particularly well, it's really hard to blame the actors and make that assumption. I think it's probably the directing. I think the reason AHSOKA is doing so well is because she's already been in a couple of other things where she did well, and she knows how to do that character and the emotional nuances of that character. I think she pulled that off pretty well. But just everything else, it felt so... In a lot of these line readings, I was looking at that like, really? That's the take we went with? There was the thing where I forget her name, but AHSOKA's former student, there's a line where she's talking to herself and she's like, the key. And it just doesn't sound convincing. And a lot of times when people are having a conversation that's supposed to have all this emotional weight, I'm looking at them talking and I'm like, I feel like they're reading off of a teleprompter. I feel like they're looking at something right off screen which has the words, and there's a guy over there flipping the cards, you know? And it's just, you know, there's also a scene where someone wakes up, and I think it might be the same lady. She wakes up from her sleep and says something, like she says somebody's name, the guy that she's looking for. I really apologize for not knowing these names. Like I said, I didn't watch the other things, but I would know these characters if I saw them again. I just don't remember their names, but missing dude, right? She wakes up and says missing dude's name. And I was like, I'm sorry, that was a bad take. That we have to do that again. And I'm not a director, right? I'm not saying like, if I directed, I'm not. I've never directed a single thing that wasn't like a small little project I made with my friends or family for YouTube or something. I've never done anything that wasn't that. But just looking at that, I would say that line you need to do that line again. You know, and I wouldn't say it in that way. You know, and like, again, I'm not having a problem with the actors, but it's just not smooth. It's just not working, I don't think, in that way. And then at the end, when all of this starts coming together, AHSOKA is coming back to try to save her Padawan. That lightsaber fight at the end was pretty cool, but my only problem was it seems like the Padawan basically was on the defensive the whole time, and I kept wondering why she wasn't beaten. Like, she's not fighting particularly well against her. She's just barely keeping up with her. It's like, why is she not getting bested? This new person who comes in is supposed to be like this force to be reckoned with. And I don't know why they had the Padawan put up such a fight. It would have been cool if, you know, maybe she kept up with her for just maybe like 15 seconds and then was taken down or something like that. And then AHSOKA is coming down to try to stay. And the episode cuts before AHSOKA can actually go over there and do something about it, which, you know, I understand why they released 2 episodes, because that would be kind of frustrating if they released that with that cliffhanger, because then that would probably make people think the episode was worse for that dangling plot thread right there. But it's like a bad kind of cliffhanger where it literally just cuts in the middle. It's not like something gets revealed or you see new danger. It's like, and we're gonna cut it before the scene ends, you know. So I'm excited to see AHSOKA come down and fight that other lady. But what I was gonna say about the fight is, it's just a little weird that she got stabbed through the torso and then just like didn't die for a minute. Like I know it probably makes some kind of sense, but it just seemed kind of silly in the moment. Like, and stabbed, and she's just like, you know, it's just a little silly, you know, and I haven't looked up any other reviews. I don't know how anyone else feels about this. I don't know if I'm way out of line and people are going to say, no, it was awesome and you're totally off base, or if people are going to say, no, it's the worst thing ever and you're being too kind. I don't know. I don't really, you know, I think it's going to be kind of like Obi-Wan, honestly. If I had to guess how people are going to receive this series, I'm guessing they're going to think it's a lot like Obi-Wan in that it's kind of good. It's got some things going for it, but the execution wasn't really there for a lot of it. A little bit of a spoiler for Obi-Wan, not really, but there's a scene in Obi-Wan where Leia is outrunning these people who are sent to get her. The Inquisitor, I think, was it the Inquisitors? It might have been the Inquisitors. I think it was. Leia is like child Leia, who's like 10, is like outrunning these fully grown adults for many minutes. it's just very silly. It's just a silly thing to watch. They're kind of like going around basically slipping on banana peels. And here with this fight, it's a different kind of silliness. It's not like, how are you beating? It would have been a lot more silly if she still would have beat her, but I knew they weren't going to do that because that wouldn't make any sense. But it's just a little silly that this fight lasted this long. And one more thing I have to say about Ahsoka's Padawan. The scene where she's on the bike, and please forgive me if it's not the same person. I believe that, I'm pretty sure it was her that was in the scene. The scene where she's, like, on the bike, and she, like, skids underneath the starship. I didn't like that scene because I thought there was a better way to establish what they were trying to establish, which is that she's kind of a rebel and she's really cool. Because they've got, like, the guitar music going, which I liked. It was a nice touch. I've never seen a scene in Star Wars with, like, some, hard rock music going. I thought that was a cool touch because, like I said, those speeders and bikes and stuff, it already kind of is hot rod culture, so it makes sense. But they could have had her doing something else. It just made it seem like she was rude and inconsiderate. It's not something to get me on her side. Because think about this, The Last Jedi, again, spoilers for The Last Jedi. I liked The Last Jedi, but you had a completely different message in that, where it's showing that, hey, sometimes being a hothead isn't all that great. Sometimes being impulsive isn't a super great thing. And in that context, Poe Dameron was actually trying to save people by being reckless in that moment, saying, okay, I can take this. She's just doing that to not have to go to a ceremony. And just speeding full throttle toward people who are supposed to be her comrades and almost getting herself killed and maybe one of them, because if she just would have rammed that ship at, full velocity, that could have really done some damage. And going under that ship definitely could have killed her. And I know it's science fiction, it's not real, but that level of recklessness is not really something to get me on someone's side, because the thing is, she's not a villain, she's not an antagonist that I can see. She's supposed to be kind of a complex, sympathetic character, and to me, that just was not a good way to start her off. I want to talk about the music again. I don't know if I mentioned this right, but I really like the camera work. I think that's done very well, so that's really all I have to say about that. Good cinematography. Good, color usage and all that stuff. But the music, I really like it. The only thing that really bothers me is it's very, very derivative. It's almost like when you're watching a parody of something and they're trying to copy it as closely as possible without actually going over the line of copyright infringement. Because the music, when she's watching the hologram, it's very clearly supposed to be an homage to Leia's theme. There's moments that are supposed to be sort of an homage to the Star Wars theme that's played on oboe softly in the background when someone's speaking in the original trilogy. So that doesn't bother some other people, but just like Jurassic World used a theme that was, I think, too close to the original Jurassic Park theme in a way that was just distracting, because it's you keep expecting it to do one thing with the notes and it does a different thing with the notes. I think this kind of did that a little bit too. But the original music was done quite well. I like that. It doesn't bother me enough where it's going to get on my nerves like it did in Jurassic World. But it's getting there with some of that. So overall, yeah, I wouldn't watch this first episode again unless, like it's possible. I don't know how many episodes are going to be in this series. It's just possible that the first episode wasn't that great, but the second episode gets a little better, and then the series just ends great. That's something that's pretty cool about watching TV series, is that they can improve as they go along. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with Ahsoka. That's my thoughts on the first one. Let me know what you guys think. I'm getting ready to dive into the second one and see if that gets any better. I will talk to you guys later, and I will see you in the second review. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.